All right, so today we're diving into some pretty interesting legal territory. And honestly, it's a little unnerving.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be exploring the ideas of Howard Freeman from his seminar called the UCC Connection, Free Yourself from Legal Tyranny.
Interesting.
But full disclosure, his perspective is considered a little unconventional by a lot of people, so we'll definitely be using our critical thinking skills during this deep dive.
I think that's always a good idea,
Oh, for sure, for sure.
especially with this topic.
Especially with this topic, yeah.
Mhm.
So what do you think is the most kind of like out there claim that he makes in this seminar?
Honestly, what I find really interesting is just how bold he is with his claims.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't hold back at all.
No, he doesn't.
He straight up suggests that America is essentially owned by its creditors because of the national debt,
Right.
and that this bankruptcy that we're in has some serious consequences for how our courts actually function.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild idea when you really think about it.
It is.
He even claims that this impacts the very foundation of our legal system,
Wow.
suggesting that courts are actually operating under something called Admiralty jurisdiction,
Admiralty.
but it's disguised as statutory jurisdiction. I have to admit, when I first heard that phrase, my mind went straight to like pirate ships and the high seas.
I mean, it does sound a bit traumatic, right?
Yeah.
But the core of his argument is that this like hidden maritime law is linked to the Uniform Commercial Code,
The UCC.
the UCC,
Yeah.
which we know governs like all commercial transactions.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting. He's saying that the UCC is a system of colorable law that's actually designed to deal with colorable money.
Oh, because you're saying that the Federal Reserve notes that we all use every day is
Good.
essentially like monopoly money.
Yeah, the great analogy.
So everything looks and feels real, but it's built on something that's artificial.
That's exactly what Freeman is arguing.
Wow.
He says that Federal Reserve notes, because they're not backed by any tangible asset like gold,
Mm-hmm.
create this colorable quality in the legal system. And he says, by accepting the convenience of using these notes, we're unknowingly agreeing to play by the rules of the system.
Hold on. So you're saying just by using the standard money system,
Yeah.
we're bound by these like alternative legal rules? That's a little unsettling.
That's exactly his point.
Yeah.
And he even points to specific sections of the UCC, like 1207 and 1103, as potential tools to reclaim our rights.
Okay. So what are these sections all about and how do they supposedly help us?
Well, he believes that 1207 gives us a way to reserve our common law rights.
Okay.
He suggests that by adding the phrase, without prejudice UCC 1207, to our signatures on legal documents,
Mm-hmm.
we can prevent what's called implied agreement
Okay.
to all of those statutes and regulations that come with things like benefits from the government.
So it's like a secret code phrase that unlocks this like back door and lets us operate under a different set of rules.
Kind of, yeah.
Hmm.
He argues that UCC 1103 supports this by stating that the UCC actually complements common law. It doesn't replace it.
I see.
So he sees this as giving individuals grounds to actually challenge statutory law if their 1207 rights are violated.
This is already getting really complex.
It is.
Does Freeman give any like real world examples of how this actually plays out?
He does. He shares a story about challenging an IRS notice of deficiency.
No way, really?
Yeah.
So he was using this strategy against the IRS.
He was. And what's interesting is he says he used his knowledge of the UCC and Supreme Court cases to push back.
Wow. Taking on the IRS with this legal loophole?
Yeah.
That's pretty bold. What about like for us regular folks who aren't, battling the tax man? Are there any like everyday scenarios where this UCC strategy could be useful?
He focuses a lot on traffic court
Traffic court.
as like a prime example.
Okay.
He recommends adding that phrase, without prejudice, UCC 1207, to your driver's license.
Wait, so just adding a phrase to my license could change how my traffic case is handled?
That's what he suggests. And then he says the key is to act innocent, like a sheep.
A sheep?
Yeah, like appearing confused and questioning, like, what are these charges? And do you even have the authority to handle this case?
So it's like using strategic naivete to your advantage. This is starting to sound like a legal thriller.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique approach.
Yeah.
He believes that by highlighting the lack of a clear, damaged party in a lot of traffic violations, so if you're not actually harming anyone by, say, not wearing a seatbelt,
Right.
you can potentially undermine the court's authority.
So essentially he's saying we can use the UCC to exploit a legal gray area.
That's the general idea.
Hmm.
And I think that's why he's attracted both supporters and critics.
Yeah, for sure. But it gets even more complex because he then goes on to talk about the idea of two distinct United States,
To United
which
States.
he believes is crucial for understanding how the UCC works.
Wow, that sounds like something out of a conspiracy theory.
It does sound pretty dramatic, I know. But his argument is that there's the continental United States, which he considers a constitutional republic. And then there's the federal United States, which is centered in D.C., which he describes as a legislative democracy.
Okay, so two different systems with potentially different rules.
That's what he's saying. And he believes there's this sneaky way that the federal government tries to pull us into its jurisdiction.
What's his trick they're using?
He calls it the ZIP code trick,
The zip code trick.
claiming that the federal government is subtly asserting its authority by encouraging us to use two-letter state abbreviations and zip codes.
Hold on. You're saying that using CA instead of California could have legal implications?
That's what he believes. He's arguing that those abbreviations are actually tied to federal regions, not states. And he says that by using them, we're unknowingly stepping into federal jurisdiction and out of the protections of our state constitutions.
Wow, I never thought about it that way.
It's amazing how much we take for granted about the systems we live under. But, if all of this is true, it paints a rather concerning picture.
Yeah, it does.
Where does he think this is all heading?
That's where things get even more intense. He warns of a potential national bankruptcy
Okay.
and a subsequent takeover by FEMA.
FEMA taking over the country. That sounds like a dystopian movie.
It does sound pretty dramatic, I know.
Yeah.
But he argues that if the U.S. defaults on its massive debt, creditors could essentially foreclose on the nation.
So, like, repossess the entire country.
Essentially. He believes that FEMA would then step in, potentially suspending rights, maybe even setting up detention camps.
This is getting pretty heavy. Does he offer any way out of this potential nightmare scenario?
He does. He suggests that states are essentially accommodation parties to the national debt,
Accommodation parties.
meaning they've unknowingly guaranteed the federal government's financial obligations.
So they're like co-signers on a massive national loan that they never agreed to.
Exactly. He believes this was done through an unconscionable contract under the UCC.
Okay, I need a little bit of clarification here. Accommodation parties and unconscionable contracts. These terms sound pretty technical.
Yeah, you're right. So an accommodation party is basically someone who agrees to be liable for a debt, even though they don't directly benefit from the loan.
Okay.
Freeman believes that the states have fallen into this role by using Federal Reserve notes and operating within the UCC system.
Okay, I see. And what about this unconscionable contract?
An unconscionable contract is basically an agreement that's so one-sided or unfair that it can be deemed invalid.
Okay.
So he's arguing that the arrangement that's binding the states to the national debt fits this definition because it's deeply imbalanced and they didn't really consent to it.
So he's saying the whole system is rigged against the states, but what can they possibly do about it? Especially if things are as dire as he claims.
Well, his solution is to challenge this unconscionable contract in international courts.
International court, so taking the legal fight global.
That's right. He believes this could buy some time and potentially force creditors to address the issue before they move forward with like a full takeover.
This is all incredibly complex, and I have to say, pretty unsettling. It's a lot to process, but I appreciate you walking me through it.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just like the first layer of Freeman's perspective. We're going to delve deeper into all of this and the potential implications in the next part of our deep dive.
Great. I'm definitely eager to hear more about the potential solutions and also some criticisms of his approach. This is definitely a deep dive that's got me thinking.
Me too. Welcome back to our exploration of Howard Freeman's ideas.
Yeah, this is definitely some thought-provoking stuff.
It is. And to be honest, kind of alarming.
Yeah, a little bit. But before we go any further, I think it's important to remember that, Freeman's views are his own.
Right.
They're not necessarily endorsed by, legal scholars or experts or anything like that.
We're just examining them.
Right, exactly. But even if, some of his claims seem far-fetched, I have to admit this seminar has sparked a real sense of curiosity in me.
I get that. It's definitely captivating. What I find interesting is that Freeman doesn't just present like a totally bleak outlook.
Right.
He does offer some potential solutions. He suggests that understanding the UCC and using specific sections can empower people to protect their rights.
So it's like knowledge is power.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Especially when it comes to the legal system.
Especially with the legal system. You mentioned earlier that Freeman sees sections 1207 and 1103 as like key tools in this strategy.
Right.
Could you remind us what makes these sections so important in his view?
Yeah. So he believes that by adding that phrase, without prejudice, UCC 1207, to signatures on legal documents, people can actually reserve their common law rights and potentially avoid agreeing to unfavorable terms.
So it's like a safeguard against like hidden contracts or obligations or something.
That's one way to think about it. And then he points to UCC 1103, which states that the UCC is actually meant to complement common law,
Okay.
not replace it. And he argues that this gives people a legal basis to challenge statutory law if their 1207 rights are violated.
So it sounds like he's saying we can use the system's own rules to maybe like circumvent its overreach.
That's the idea.
Does he give any concrete examples of how this actually works?
He does. Remember that story he shared about challenging the IRS notice of deficiency?
Yeah.
He claims he achieved this by using his understanding of the UCC to, like, dishonor the presentment.
The presentment.
Which is a UCC term for, like, a bill or demand for payment.
Oh, okay. So he basically told the IRS, no thanks. I'm really curious how that actually went down.
He just returned the notice with a letter stating that he was dishonoring the presentment.
Okay.
And that he had reserved his rights under UCC 1207.
So he just fought back with like a piece of paper and a legal code. It's almost too simple.
I know, right? But Freeman believes this tactic worked because he was operating within the system's own framework.
It's like speaking their language to point out the flaws in their game.
Exactly. But not everyone is dealing with the IRS, on a daily basis.
Right. Of course not.
So are there other more like everyday situations where this could be helpful?
Exactly.
And he says yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. He talks a lot about traffic court.
Again, traffic court.
As a prime example,
yeah.
He recommends adding that without prejudice, UCC 1207 phrase to your driver's license.
Okay.
To challenge the court's jurisdiction if you get a ticket.
Okay, I'm trying to picture this. Let's say I get pulled over for speeding. I hand the officer my license with that phrase on it. What happens next?
He says to act innocent and confused.
Okay.
Question the nature of the charges and the court's authority.
So it's like strategic bewilderment.
Right. It sounds kind of funny.
Yeah.
But he thinks that by highlighting that there's no, like, damaged party in a lot of these cases.
Right.
Like you're not actually hurting anyone by, say, not wearing a seatbelt.
Right.
You can potentially challenge their jurisdiction under common law.
So he's basically saying we can use the UCC to expose a blind spot in the legal system where their rules don't apply.
Yeah, that's the general idea. He even suggests questioning those two-letter state abbreviations on licenses.
Right.
Tying back to his ZP code trick.
The ZIP code trick, those abbreviations put us under federal jurisdiction.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how he connects all these seemingly disparate ideas. But let's switch gears for a second and talk about Social Security.
Okay.
We touched upon his concerns about the future of it earlier.
Yeah, he's particularly worried about the devaluation of the dollar over time.
Right.
And how that'll affect the value of those benefits.
Yes, I remember that comparison he made to the German mark after World War I.
Yeah.
Not exactly a comforting thought. What does he suggest people do, especially young people just entering the workforce?
He encourages young people to demand a guarantee of performance from the government.
A guarantee of performance.
Before enrolling in Social Security.
What does that even mean in this context?
He's basically saying to use the UCC's provision on assurance of performance, which allows people to reject contracts that don't offer adequate guarantees.
Okay.
But he's applying this to the Social Security contract.
So it's like saying, hey, government, if you can't guarantee that the money I'm getting back in retirement will be worth the same as what I'm putting in now, I don't want to sign up.
That's exactly it. He thinks young people have the right to demand that their contributions retain their value.
It's a bold stance, but I see the logic there. It's about taking control of your financial future.
Right, and not just blindly trusting a system that might not have your best interest at heart.
That's a key theme running through all of his stuff.
It is.
This idea of individual empowerment, critical thinking, and understanding how these systems work.
It is. And he's not afraid to say it.
No, he's definitely not.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the last part of our deep dive,
Okay.
Are there any key takeaways from this segment that you think our listeners should keep in mind?
I think it's crucial to remember that Freeman's interpretations of the UCC are not like universally accepted, and his tactics might not work for everyone.
Right. We're presenting his perspective, not offering legal advice.
Exactly. But I do think, even if you don't agree with everything he says, there are some valuable insights.
Like what?
His focus on understanding the UCC and how it affects our daily lives, that's valuable no matter what.
So it's like having a basic understanding of car mechanics.
Right.
Even if you're not a mechanic yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can help you avoid getting taken advantage of.
Right. It can help you troubleshoot.
Yeah.
And his emphasis on questioning things and being willing to challenge the status quo, while maybe controversial,
Yeah.
can be really empowering.
Definitely.
It's about recognizing that we have a voice.
Yes.
That we can question things.
Yes.
And that we have a right to seek fairness in the systems that we live in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even if that whole FEMA takeover thing seems unlikely,
Yeah.
his focus on preparedness is good advice no matter what.
Yeah. Being ready for unexpected events, whether economic or political.
Exactly.
It's always good to have a backup plan.
Always.
To be as prepared as possible.
Yes.
Well, we'll be back in the final part of our deep dive
Okay.
to explore those criticisms of Freeman's perspective and to discuss what we can take away from his approach. Welcome back. So we've been on this journey exploring Howard Freeman's perspective on the UCC and legal tyranny.
It's been a wild ride.
It has been. We've covered so much.
So much.
From a bankrupt America to, his tactics for dealing with the legal system. But I think it's time to address the elephant in the room.
What's that?
The criticisms.
Ah, yes. Of course.
Because as interesting as his ideas are, there are definitely some potential flaws in his argument.
Right. Well, while his seminar is definitely thought-provoking,
Yeah.
it's important to remember that his interpretations aren't universally accepted.
Right.
Some legal experts even see his theories as oversimplifications.
Okay.
Or even straight-up misrepresentations of the law.
So his ideas are a little controversial.
A bit, yeah.
What are some of the specific criticisms?
Well, one of the main concerns is that he presents this, black and white view of the legal system.
Okay.
Like, there's these simple hacks or
Wow.
loopholes that can be exploited.
Yeah.
But the reality is, law is much more nuanced.
It's not that easy.
It's not that easy.
Yeah.
It's not like a secret code
Right.
that just unlocks all the doors.
Yeah.
There's also the criticism that he focuses so much on individual rights that he doesn't really address the bigger societal implications.
What do you mean by that?
Fun, think about it. What if everyone started doing what he suggests?
Okay.
Challenging jurisdiction all the time.
Right.
Refusing to participate in systems.
Yeah.
It could really disrupt how the government functions.
Right. It could lead to chaos.
Exactly.
Chaos.
Yeah. It's like that classic tension between individual freedom and the common good.
Right.
If you push personal freedom too far, it might undermine the whole system.
It could. There's also the worry that people might misinterpret his teachings.
Okay.
And end up making bad legal decisions. Oh, yeah. Making things worse for themselves.
Exactly.
Right.
It's important to remember, he's not a lawyer.
Right.
This isn't legal advice.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
So Freeman's perspective is interesting.
It is.
It raises some important questions. But we have to be skeptical.
Yes.
And get real legal advice if we need it.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I do think,
Yeah.
even if we don't agree with everything he says, there are still some valuable takeaways.
Like what?
Well, his emphasis on understanding the UCC
Yeah.
and how it's everywhere in our lives, that's valuable no matter what.
Right. Even if we don't buy into all of his interpretations.
Exactly. It's like learning a new language.
Okay.
You don't have to be fluent,
Right.
but knowing a few phrases
Yeah.
can help you in new situations.
Right. And avoid misunderstandings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And his focus on critical thinking.
Yes.
Questioning things, standing up for your rights.
Right.
Those are valuable tools in any situation.
Exactly. Not just legal stuff.
Right.
It's about knowing you have a voice, that you can question authority,
Yes.
and that you have a right to seek fairness.
Absolutely.
In any system.
In any system.
Yeah.
And even if we don't think FEMA is going to take over,
Right.
that whole preparedness thing is good advice for everyone.
Being ready for anything.
Anything.
That's always a good idea.
It is.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive.
It has.
We've explored Howard Freeman's perspective on the UCC, his claims, his criticisms, and some valuable insights.
It's been fascinating.
It has.
Looking at things from a different angle.
Challenging those assumptions.
Challenging assumptions, exactly.
So we hope this deep dive sparked your curiosity.
And maybe a little healthy skepticism.
Because remember, knowledge is power.
Always.
And critical thinking is essential.
Especially with these kinds of ideas.
Exactly. So until next time, keep those minds open and keep diving deep.